Out there in the world. Still coming to you live from my digital prison. All right. So, until somebody breaks me out this joint, let's talk about Caesar. Julius Caesar. All right, so we hear the name Caesar all the time. We now have Caesar salads. We have Caesar's palace in Vegas. Caesar, hail to Caesar. You know, uh, Caesar, this and that. So let's find out who this original Caesar was, because this was his name. Caesar goes on to take on a meaning all of its own. Okay. Um, and last we talked about we were talking about the fall of the Roman Empire, and we talked about Julius Caesar being in the first triumvirate with Crassus and Pompey. Um, well, let's talk about Caesar himself. Caesar was a general, and he was stationed in Gaul, and I'll tell you about Gaul and where it was in a minute, but it's what we today would call France. Uh, and he was able to conquer the barbarians of Gaul and Britain. Um, and he becomes a hero to Rome's lower class. I mean, everybody loved Caesar. Like pick a popular person in today's media, uh, and everybody loves this person. What comes to mind is like everybody's always talking about like the Kardashians or all these people and how everybody, ooh, we love these people, so and so. Well, Caesar was like that to these people, but Caesar actually did something unlike the Kardashians. Um, he, you know, was a great general, and the wealthy and powerful, as we talked in the last one, feared Caesar because they were afraid with Caesar's popularity, he would take their power. Because we talked about how the powerful would do all they could to maintain their power and continue to get more. And so they were afraid that Caesar was going to be the latter of these two, being one that would continue to try to get more power and would take their power away, and he would have the backing of the people to do this. Okay, here's a map. You can kind of see here is Gaul. A lot of this is a lot different than what we know. This is all broken up into a lot of countries now. This was Germania. Uh, this is Gaul. Was Britannia. Uh, Over down here was where Carthage was, and you can see that this tells you a little bit. It started out here in the plains of Latium, where Rome began. Shows you how they grew during the first Punic Wars, the second Punic War, or the third Punic War, and then shows you by the death of Julius Caesar, which is something we'll get to today. Uh, this is where the empire was, and he had gained all this area of Gaul for Rome, and even on up into Britannia. Um, Now, Caesar was rising up, and he was becoming more and more popular, more and more powerful. Remember, he was in a triumvirate with Crassus and Pompey. Crassus was still the wealthiest and most powerful man in Rome. And in 53 BC, Crassus was killed in a battle. Everybody starts freaking out. Oh my gosh. Is Pompey or Caesar, which one of those are going to take power? Because they pretty much knew these three were the big three. And they decided they were most afraid of Caesar. So the Senate chose Pompey because they believed they could control Pompey to rule over Italy alone. He was going to be their ruler. And in 49 BC, the Senate orders Caesar to give up his army, disperse your army, and come back home. And they had a rule that you did not cross the Rubicon with an army. And the Rubicon's a river, and I'll point it out to you here on a map in just a minute. But if you cross the Rubicon with an army, it was considered declaring war on Rome. They didn't allow armies within that range of Rome. And Caesar knows if he gives up his army and comes home, they're going to kill him. But yet he loves Rome and he doesn't want to declare war on Rome. This is his country, and Caesar loved Rome. And so he was stuck between a rock and a hard place. What should I do? So Caesar crosses the Rubicon with his army, knowing that this is declaring war on his country. And so him and Pompey clash and have battles, and in 48 BC he defeats Pompey. And you can kind of see here a little bit of some of the battles here. Um, that in red you see is the Roman Empire. Here's some major battles, throughout Gaul. Um, but you can see some battles of the Civil War. And so here's where Caesar crosses the Rubicon, right here. Okay. Um, so that they see they didn't want armies close to Rome. So you couldn't bring that army from here. All out here is fine because you're conquering all of this. But don't you bring it past this point, or that means that you're declaring war on us. And so that's what happened. And so Caesar winds up defeating Pompey, and Pompey fled and is assassinated down here. Caesar was actually quite unhappy that Pompey was actually assassinated. Uh, Caesar takes power. He made himself dictator. Remember when we talked about how dictators would stand up in times of trouble and then they would step down? Well, he realized that the system had just become so corrupt, and so he made himself dictator. And he began filling the Senate with members who were loyal to him. And he began granting citizenship to people living in Roman territory outside of Italy. Because, they had only had, you could only, first off, Roman citizens, and then it spread to citizens of Italy, could become citizens of Rome, or people of Italy could become citizens of Rome. And people living eventually in the other territories controlled by Rome could become citizens. And remember that there was a lot more benefits of being citizens, as we talked about, under their government. Um, and he started new colonies to start providing land for the landless. All these people that their farms had been taken and all these problems that had happened, he started trying to fix them. Let's conquer new places, start new colonies, here's some new cities. Go and have land here. Don't, rather than you being homeless and landless. Um, and he made landowners hire more free workers. He told them, they can only have so many slaves, and you've got to have so many free workers. So he started making jobs and getting land for people. So people loved Caesar even more. They created a new calendar for Caesar. It's called the Julian calendar. Um, it had 12 months, 365 days, and a leap year. It's very close to what we use today. It's not the calendar we use today. It was used until 1582 AD when we began the Gregorian calendar. Um, but he was very popular with the poor. I mean, they loved him. And he brought peace and order to Rome for a short period. And in 44 BC, the Senate named Caesar dictator for life. For the rest of his life, he would be dictator. But Julius made a lot of these wealthy and powerful people nervous. And they were afraid that, maybe this won't end. And they were scared of all this power that the people loving him gave him. And they were afraid of these changes he was making. He was, making them hire free people rather than just using slaves. He was making colonies for them. And on the Ides of March, and it's March 15th, that's what we call the Ides of March, he was warned to be wary of the Ides of March. And Caesar was a very arrogant man who thought he could handle anything. Very brilliant man, but believed he could handle anything. And so on March 15th, 44 BC, Brutus, one of his closest allies, and Cassius, both of them close allies, um, but Brutus was, Brutus was his bud. Uh, they murdered Julius Caesar. Them along with a lot of the other senators, stabbed Julius Caesar to death. They all pulled knives and began stabbing him. And this is where you get the famous line, "Et tu, Brute," meaning, "and you too, Brutus." Like, out of all these people, you're going to betray me, Brutus? And they knew Brutus and Cassius was very important. And there's a whole play that Julius Caesar, right now, that Shakespeare wrote about all of this. And it's one of the places where, Caesar gets some of this fame is through the Shakespearean work. Um, but this is how the Julius Caesar winds up dying in 44 BC. After his death, a civil war breaks out. There's all havoc. Uh, Caesar's killers square up against, and you got these powerful senators. Octavian was Caesar's heir. Okay, he wasn't actually a Caesar, but he took on the name of Caesar. And Octavian was always a weak and sickly kind of boy, but he'd been tutored and raised up by Caesar, and actually, became great. Marcus Antony and Lepidus were two of Caesar's generals, and so they went off to kill uh, the killers of Caesar. And also, and you get some great stuff if you, especially through the play, you get the whole thing from Mark Antony where, friends, Romans, or countrymen, Romans, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. Because he came to say a lot of things to turn a lot of doubt on these people who killed Caesar without coming out and saying it. It's a great speech. You should check it out. Um, and in 43 BC, they formed the Second Triumvirate after they killed off the assassins. Well, shortly after that, Octavian makes Lepidus retire. He's old. He makes him wind up retiring. And Octavian winds up ruling the West, and Antony winds up ruling the East. And you wind up with a whole love affair with Antony and Cleopatra. And they have a falling out, or Octavian and Antony. And Anthony winds up joining with Cleopatra, and in 31 BC there was the Battle of Actium. Octavian crushes Antony and Cleopatra's army, and then Antony and Cleopatra go and kill themselves with asps, which are a type of snake there in Africa. Because remember, Cleopatra was from Egypt. Octavian, who is now 32 years old, was now the sole ruler of Rome. And in 27 BC, Octavian said he would restore the Republic because he knew everybody was worried about what he would do, and he didn't want what happened to Caesar to happen, or to Julius, his great uncle, to happen to him. And so he says, "All right, we'll restore the Republic." He knew that the Republic wasn't going to work. Things had changed too much, and the problems couldn't be solved through the Republic. So he appeased the Senate and he gave them some powers. But in 27 BC, Octavian takes the title Augustus. Augustus means great or reverend. And he makes himself Imperator. Remember there were praetors, consuls and stuff, but he makes him Imperator, which is emperor. And thus he becomes the first emperor of Rome. A lot of people think Julius Caesar was the first emperor of Rome. He was not. So Augustus Caesar, is one of my favorite people in all of history, Augustus Caesar becomes the Emperor of Rome. All hail Augustus Caesar. So until next time, deuces!